IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Here's your smart fact of the day. I'm sure all of you who listen to Smarter with Sid are obviously familiar with what a TED Talk is and what TED is. But did you know TED actually was conceived in 1984 by a guy called Harry Marks? Yeah, that's surprising because we all associate the current curator of TED and TED Talks and the entire franchise model that TED is on with a guy called Chris Anderson, who essentially took it over from 2002. Did you also know that in 2018, the annual membership fee for TED was around $7,000? But essentially, the conference itself was $10,000 per attendee if you just wanted to attend the TED conference. Let me begin with a confession, right? That's what we do at Smarter with Sid, right? What we do is that we build a little bit of a context. After we build that context, then we actually understand. Well, we start off with a smart fact, then we build a little context, then we go down to first principles if there are any, the deeper truths, and then some takeaways if we have any takeaways for us to use, or for us to be aware of whenever we are making any decisions in our career, work, life, etc. Right? So that's the overall broad level sort of flow of this particular talk, which is not a TED Talk, but it's my podcast. Okay, so coming back to TED Talks, I think a little bit of context is extremely important. I used to love TED Talks. In fact, when it went online, which was in the early 2000s, is when I came to know about it. Obviously, TED was centered around technology, entertainment, and design, but it hardly ever stood by those things only. In fact, they became more and more across the field, those ideas worth spreading. And that's what probably TED was. They were ideas worth spreading. And I used to love TED Talks. I used to listen and get completely immersed in a TED Talk. And I used to be, the whole world was opening up to me. And I'm sure people of my vintage used to love TED Talks as well. And, there was a lot of feeling amongst people my age that I'm going to give a TED Talk one day, or yes, I want to attend a TED conference in Vancouver one day and stuff like that. But if I notice over a period of time, it seems to have diluted. And while it has many references, even in movies like, hey, this sounds like a TED Talk, or even some of my lectures, students have kind of said that, you know what, this sounded like a TED Talk, which I kind of took as a compliment. But the fact is that these TED Talks have kind of diluted, and I was wondering why. And this is where I do the deep dive. The deep dive actually shows me two or three things. The first thing is when TED started coming into our imaginations, not as the conference, but when it started going digital, it was a place wherein I could really learn new ideas. They were so brilliant, they were fantastic, and eventually they allowed me to connect the dots, etc. But at that point in time, YouTube, was a very interesting place because it only had cat videos and it was at its infancy really. And so therefore, I was not getting any material of note from YouTube at that point in time. Maybe YouTube hadn't figured out my algorithm for me, but that's what it was. But over a period of time, the quantity of quality content, that was a tongue twister, the quantity of quality content on YouTube just increased, and I started getting into various rabbit holes, and I figured out one really crazy thing, that a lot of the content on YouTube was amazing because there was no restriction. There was no 18 minutes or 20 minutes. So, we could go down a rabbit hole with Robert Sapolsky, for example, on behavioral biology, listen to Stanford series lectures, listen to various other professors and stuff like that. And so because there was no restriction on time, it meant that people who wanted to do a deeper dive, and trust me, Joe Rogan was also there in the 2010, around 2010 to very recently. So you had these long ass videos, which also served as quasi podcasts for a long time. And it was a very strange place. And I think that contributed to TED kind of going down. because TED had a restrictive format, which was 18 minutes or 20 minutes. Trust me, that format is good because it allows for more concise things to happen. But the audience also evolved, and now they were thinking, which is the second reason, they were thinking that I don't think 20 minutes is a short time, it is a long time. And that kind of put the spanner in TED's work, right? Because here was an audience which was moving either to YouTube, the older audience was moving to YouTube, the younger audience was coming in and saying, hey, 20 minutes is too long. Okay, so caught between a rock and hard place. So you had these two elements, and the third element was essentially that the business model, or whatever the model was a franchisee driven one, and it led to a certain level of mediocrity in the TED Talks. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good idea to get speakers around the world and stuff like that. And some of these speakers are brilliant, even in the TEDx things, right? So TEDx Micah is one thing, TEDx XYZ, and some of them are brilliant, and some of them are well known, some of them are not so good. So the quality became inconsistent, even though TED does try very, very hard to keep the quality standards really, really well. I don't think that all speakers are good. So the quantity might be good. It may not be woo woo, it will be scientific and on all of that. But the fact is that the quality of speakers is not good, and people actually kind of tried to figure out how to game the format. So there became a sort of a format for a TED talk. And that was, that led to its own downfalls, because you could actually expect things to flow in a particular way, especially the sort of dramatic sort of speakers had their own but peculiar format, which was immediately copied. And that's a strange rant that I'll say for a better time, because I think the copying of a format and making it popular doesn't only exist in TED, it exists across all social media as well. So these are the three reasons: YouTube, the evolution of the audience, and the format itself being kind of copied by speakers who are not so good. So I decided to kind of, after listening from a very close family member, who went to a TED talk, and what I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the speakers in this specific TEDx were very good. So I said, okay, why not give it a shot? Let me go to TED again. And I went to TED and I realized that, wow, this is a great discovery platform now. So while YouTube you can discover, there's so many suggestions that sometimes you get stuck and then you get distracted and stuff. But the information architecture of the TED.com or the TED app or whatever is quite good, and it allows you to select. It's quite intuitive, it is clear, and it allows you to discover new things. So I actually went to TED.com yesterday and actually discovered a few things. And they've started stuff like animation, and they've started new things, right? So there's a longer conversation that Elon Musk has had, about 50 odd minutes on TED Talk, which I haven't listened to yet, but I think will be quite interesting. So they're kind of losing the format as well. It's probably a little like Twitter moving from 130 to 280 characters or something. I don't know. So that is something that they've been trying. And obviously there's some advertising I saw as well. So they're also experimenting with the business model. I'm sure they did that a few years in the past. I remember vaguely. But I think these were some interesting, encouraging signs for TED. I genuinely think that the way ahead for TED would perhaps be, kind of restricting the amount of speakers. Test the speaker. I know they do test the speaker, but they end up having the same kind of formatted way of speaker speaking. So maybe change the length of the thing, have different lengths, maybe 5 minute, 10 minute, 15 minute, something like that. Maybe reduce the number of franchises. I know it's probably against the rules of TED, but hey, reduce the number of franchises in order to improve the kind of output. So some suggestions for TED, and what can we take away from this? I think the biggest takeaway is not to be restricted to a format, especially when we are making our own presentations, or whenever we are making any speeches, or whenever we are trying to, just share an idea or whatever. Don't be routinized. I think the routinization of anything tends to lead to a downfall, because people can expect, and it's like a magician showing a trick the way in which it's played. So that's what I think about TED. So if you notice the way in which we did this for people new to Smarter with Sid, looked at the context, went down to first principles, and ended up with takeaways. And hey, if you like this podcast of mine and this particular episode, do like, do share, do subscribe, and more than that, do follow me. I'm the traveling professor, by the way. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Instagram. And if you like stuff like this, well, IVM podcasts, they've got some really, really good stuff going for you. On that happy note then, I'll see you soon. Ciao.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Habit Coach, Dr. Madan Kataria tells Ashton how laughter yoga came to be. On Pesa Vesa Anupamas Mukesh Kalra, founder and CEO at ET Money, about their new intelligent investment service, ET Money Genius. On Smarter With Sid, Siddharth explores the relationship between Twitter, free speech, and Elon Musk. On The Habit Coach, Ashton shares tips on how to not abandon a new habit midway. And on Say No to Drama, Chetna guides us through a process to better identify our intuition. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're following this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is one of our biggest, most helpful things you could do for us. We'd really appreciate that. And also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. Go check out ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. You get a list of all of our YouTube channels there. We're also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and the advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. This really helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app.
Love fighting?
We've got you covered.
Check out our show, The Fighting Goat, where we, the voices of the internet, Arjun Chipalkatti and Somesh Kamra, bring to you crazy weekly action on your favorite combat show, The Fighting Goat.
Be it commentary, breakdown, predictions, analysis of styles and techniques.
And of course, your round of favorite fighters.
You can listen to us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all major podcast streaming platforms.